Welcome back to the Scenery Farm. I'm making an overhang flat. It's for when you have an outside corner, two walls meeting, where the frame of the luan, the frame is narrower than the luan, and the luan overhangs and it caps the end of another flat. I've just cleaned up the ends on these with this 1x3. I take a clamp and I clamp them so they're the same, in the same orientation. If I were doing lots of cuts that were 8'10" 1/2" like these, well, I'd have a stop, but I'm only doing two, so whatever. Take more time to put the stop in, and so I just mark it. And the overall size of the luan on this flat is 9 foot by 2'6", and the frame is 2'6" minus the thickness of a flat, which is in and around 2 3/4 of an inch, 2.5 inch pine plus, well, 1/4 inch-ish luan. The pine is dead on, the luan's thin of 1/4 inch. So I've cut those pieces. Those are my stiles. And now I'm going to move on to cutting the rails, the top and bottom, which is 2'3" and a fat quarter. And then I'm going to cut, oh no, I actually did these ones on the nose, 2'3" and a quarter. And then once I've cut these, because there's only two of them, then I'm going to cut the toggles. And the toggles are that dimension, 2'3" and a quarter, minus 2 thicknesses of pine. I try to use tape measures as little as possible, and I try to, as often as possible, use the actual material. In this instance. So I give myself a bit of I line it up, I make myself happy, I hold it in place, I put my stop block in place, and I'm transferring my hands from one thing to another, holding the wood, holding the stop block, holding the stop block, blocking, and I make my cut. And then what I do is I put the two pieces of pine up against the stop block so that I can then take the wood that will be toggled soon, put that right up against the pine, and then I remove that pine, hold the new stock, move the stop block over that 1.5-inch-ish. It's actually pretty close to dead on. I could have just marked it, but now I know it'll be an exact measurement. I have 4 toggles in this flat, and yeah. Oh, very exciting. A pause to enjoy a cut. Now that pine was a little squirrely in terms of straightness, so it did a little bind, so I pulled it out and I just kept the cut going. Putting together a flat, I do have a video or a series of videos, I'm not sure. A number of times I think on my channel I show how to build a flat. And what I call a TV flat up here, which is different than a Hollywood flat. There's an extra vertical on the flat, dadoed into the toggles, which is, it's a better flat in terms of flatness of luan. It just typically doesn't matter in my world, but fair play to them. It is one more structural and flatter flat. I'm just marking this. I do care about a bit, so I'm marking 3/8 of an inch on either side of 2 foot centers. So 1 foot 11 and 5/8 and 2 foot 3/8 of an inch all the way up on center, and I'm using one of the rails to add the 3/4 of an inch of the rail that will be there. So I didn't transfer them both pieces like a goof. So I think the ends of the boards weren't lining up with the top of the rail. The end of the stiles weren't lining up the top of the rail, so I didn't have awesome control of that, so I'm just transferring it. I could have probably just done one mark, but I'm in that kind of mood where I did two. You can just mark it on center, like put the one line and center the pine on that. Do it regularly, but depends on my mood, I suppose. This is building the flat. It's pretty straightforward, putting the frame together. 7/16 gauge crown staples. I'm using 2-inchers in this instance, and I have them again to get me through the flat. And sometimes the mistake I make at this point is when I'm moving things over, I flip one of them upside down or right side up, and then my marks are on the bottom and I have to remark it, which is a bit annoying. But there's no good reason why the two of them are sitting there. They just happen to be there, and move it over. And keep my fingers away from the staple gun, because those staples can shoot out sideways. If you're putting in, because it's just like 4 7/16 of an inch of wire in that staple. And you can see my forearm is stabilizing the style and my hand is on the toggle, and that way I can play them off one another. But if you're shooting something and with one leg of that staple hits a pin knot, which sometimes happens, but the other end of the staple will take all of the pressure and shoot it out, and it becomes a big curly cue that's 4 inch change, and up to 4 inches long. There's half an inch still in the wood. So you try and keep your hands a good distance away, because 16 gauges, it's chubby enough for this, but it's not like it's a nail. They bend rather readily. And I'm just 2 in each of these, and if it were scene or display flat or something like that, I would be putting 2 pins and a number 8 screw in there, or if I didn't have my 7/16 ground staple with me, that's the way I'd do it. I've seen flats made with 1/4 inch narrow crowns, 18 gauge 1/4 inch narrow crowns, 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 long. They didn't seem to suffer from it. It's just a different style. So you can see how quickly that frame goes together, and then I go clear off the table saw bench, because I'm going to cut a sheet of 4x10 Louis on the table saw, and I have just within an inch or so the exact amount of room to put a piece of luan on the 4x10 piece of luan on the table saw and grip it. 4x10 luan is not something that's available at a big box store, but you can get it at any supplier who caters to the entertainment industry, or if there's a plywood specialty place in your world, that's where you can get it. So this is obviously, it's about 10 foot 1/4 of an inch. The 4x10s we get, whereas I've heard tell that in other jurisdictions you can get bang on 4x10 and it's primed. This is me just checking to make sure I'm actually recording, because I've missed stuff in the past. I'm just making a measurement from the bottom of the Louis, 9 foot on the nose on both edges. I tend not to use a square in these instances, because oftentimes when I'm using a square, it will get little glue spots on it, and I just prefer, and so then it won't be square when I actually put it up against something. It's squared natively, but if something gets in the way, it's not going to be square anymore. So I just do the measurement from the bottom, both sides, put the track for the track saw on there, and give it a cut. Kind of like the track saw. We used to just make a plywood track with a piece of typically 10-foot luan, and then a fence that was made out of 1/2 inch plywood. Attach it face to face, and then we would use the saw and cut off the excess luan, and then we'd lay that on top of wherever we were cutting, and we'd be able to screw it in and have the equivalent of what a track saw is. But I gotta say, this is a pretty nice tool. I've just set the depth so it's very, very shallow. It's set to 1/2 inch, so it only goes into the support boards. Only a teeny wee bit. I'm done with those sticks, so they can go away. This is the size of flat that I can actually have both the flat and the luan on my bench at the same time, which is kind of nice. And I'll be able to just slip it on in place and put them back in their home. wonder how many more years I'll be able to use those. Hopefully a few more. One's shorter than the other because I made too deep a cut and it fell apart. It just kind of went away. This is a very boring moment. When I put the glue on, this is not new to any video here, I've done this a bunch, I use the edge of the glue bottle to actually run along it, and I glue far away from me first, and then I do the toggles off to the side of me, the rail and the toggles off to the side of me, and then I trail along for the last style, and that way I don't lean into the glue with my belly. Got the last rail there, and then all the way along the style. And I typically destroy the tips of the glue bottle long before the bottle itself is gone. This one, the tip is close to on its way out. Because it's an overhang, I can just kind of slide her into place, get her close like that. I probably would have lifted and dropped it if it weren't an overhang flat. I'm using a narrow crown stapler. I believe I'm using 1-inch narrow crowns. 3/4 would work. I'd say half is too little and 1/4 is too much. 3/4, 7/8, 1-inch, all those would kind of work. That's just me looking to see if there's any left. Start in a corner, do the short edge first, overhang the bench so you can grab it and you can, excuse me, bringing it, push it a bit with the gun sometimes. Try not to staple on top of one of the joints, because 50% of the time you'll hit one of those 16 gauge nail crowns or the whatever fastener you have in the corner. I usually go up 2 feet, line that up, having it overhang the bench so I can grab it a bit, and then I put that in, and then I go backwards. Now, I did have a lot of glue on this, and there will be glue to squeeze out, and because I will be putting a square up against this, and I do care a little bit about it. Clean that up before I put my square up against it. Do the last bit of lining up. And you can see how much I moved over that. It was a goodly amount. Use a nail gun to tap the wood like that. Don't use it as a big hammer. Use it as a little tap in. And then the end of this is going to be where it's going to be, unless the rail on this end has a bow in it, and you have to kind of persuade it into being in line with the luan. I just leave it alone. It's going to be where it's going to be. I take my adjustable square and I figure out how much the pine is underhanging just by pushing the loose blade up against the edge of the pine or the rule, and then you just use the edge of the adjustable square itself and you slide along, and then you're able to give yourself a bit of a mark. It's a fairly typical carpentry trick there, and I've just marked the edge of the pine, so I go in about 3/8 of an inch all the way down. I think I remember looking at this after I was done, and I felt like I was taking out stock in a nail company because I put so many staples. They're so close together. 3/4 of an inch is fine, or sorry, 6 inches is fine. 4 to 8 inches is typical. This is fairly thick luan, so you can probably spread it out a little more if you want. I certainly didn't take my own advice there. Now, this method I'm going to show you with the drywall square, it's pretty typical. and I don't want to put the square up before I wet the rag. And I already had one that I'd been using as a bit of a rag. So I dampen the rag, and I just go along the edge, and the glue squeeze out would have landed on the square and made it a bit squidgy on the end. It wouldn't have been as nice. So take 2 minutes, give that a bit of a clean off. Now I line up the square so that the edge of the 4-foot length of the square is about 1/4 inch over from the staples. And then I just run down it and I put the staples in. As I said, this square is pretty square, so as long as I have my toggles in straight, I can work my way along. Now some nail guns, some staple guns have a tendency to tear as it pulls along. This one doesn't. You wouldn't be able to push it, but like if you have the safety for the nail gun on the far end of the nose, every single time you slide down that blade, it's going to drop into the hole and it's going to potentially tear the wood a bit. So this one, the safety's on the near end of the nose of it, so it's always sliding in fresh lube. I'm just going to throw some mud on there, clean off the knives, give this a wee sand before I start that, and then once I've given this a sand, then I'm just sanding where I put the staples in. Once that's done, then I just go ahead and move on to the mudding. Now this flat, I do not round the corners because I just break the edges at the end. I don't round the corners because it's not butting up to another flat, so it doesn't need to be round. But you got to do something to the edge so it doesn't chip when you're moving it around. And I just give that right behind the camera is a big open door, so and the air is moving quite nicely out of the shop. So and now I just fill the holes, the 1/4 inch staples, pushing in towards the flat, angling the knife towards the flat to have less on the ends. As I say, I feel like a carpenter. Scenic painters are just dead amazing at this. I mean, I get the job done, but if you're ever fortunate enough to be in a studio where real scenic painters are working, it's quite magical how they can do this so nicely. So there you go. That's all very exciting, and I just finished filling the whole flat. So all of it is filled. I break the edges, the leading edge of the overhang. And once I've broken the leading edge of the overhang like that, there's a tiny little recess there, or bevel chamfer, whatever you want to call it. And then when you put it up against the flat, there's somewhere for fill to go on the corner, if you even need to. So I'm going to show you now where the other flat will go. That mud is dry now. I flip it over, and I'm going to show you with a flat that actually is not the flat that goes there. But with that overhang there, on an outside corner, what you'll do is you'll butt the new flat right up against the back of the luan and staple the overhang to the edge of the flat. That way you have luan corners, and it's nice and pretty. See you next time, everyone. Be well.